My son told me a reverse mortgage would finally pay me back for everything I'd done for him, and the way he said it made my chest ache with pride and pain at the same time. He laughed softly, like we were sharing a private joke, and I remember thinking how strange it was that gratitude could sound so rehearsed. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the same one where he used to do homework while I cooked dinner. He'd brought folders, neat and organized, like he was the parent now. Every time I reached for a paper, he gently tapped it and said, "Don't worry about that part, Mom. I've got it." Each time he said it, something inside me shrank. I told myself it was just the discomfort of getting older, of needing help. He kept using comforting words: safe, simple, guaranteed. He said I'd be able to live in the house for the rest of my life. He said the bank would send me monthly money, like a reward for surviving this long. When he smiled, it wasn't cruel. That's what hurt the most. He looked sincere, almost proud of himself, like he was rescuing me. When I asked why everything had to be done so quickly, he sighed, just slightly, the way he used to when he was a teenager, and thought I was being difficult. "These rates won't last," he said, "and I don't want you stressing over paperwork. You've done enough." The words landed heavy. You've done enough. They sounded like kindness, but they felt like a door closing. He positioned the pen in my hand. His fingers brushed mine, steady and confident. I noticed how he'd already filled in most of the forms. My name was typed so many times it barely felt like mine anymore. I searched his face for any sign of doubt, any hesitation that might give me permission to stop. There was none. As I signed, I felt a quiet tug in my stomach. I thought about my late husband fixing the roof himself because he refused to risk the house. I thought about birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees on the front steps. This house had always been my promise to my family, stability, no matter what. My son leaned back and said, "See? Easy. This is going to change everything for the better." The word everything echoed in my head longer than it should have. After he left, the kitchen felt too quiet. The folders were gone, but the indent from the pen remained on the paper beneath. I pressed my finger into it as if I could erase what I'd done by feeling it hard enough. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself this was love taking a modern form. Still, that night, I walked through the house and touched the walls, the door frames, the light switches. I didn't know why I was doing it. I only knew that something precious had shifted, and I was afraid to name it. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost polite, like everything else that came later. The deposit I expected didn't arrive when he said it would. When I asked him about it, he smiled and told me not to watch the calendar so closely. "It takes time," he said, in that calm voice that made me feel foolish for even asking. Weeks passed. Then another excuse. Each time I brought it up, his answers grew shorter, more practiced. He never raised his voice. He never sounded angry. That made the resentment creep in slowly, like something unwelcome but persistent. I began to feel embarrassed for needing explanations from my own son. One afternoon, he stopped by and talked about his business with new excitement. He said things were finally moving, that the money he'd been waiting on had come through. The way he spoke made my stomach tighten. I realized he was describing funds that sounded exactly like the loan proceeds I had been promised. When I asked directly if the reverse mortgage money was involved, he laughed lightly and said, "It's all connected, Mom. It benefits us both. Us both." The words felt heavy. I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone told me I wasn't meant to ask more questions. He changed the subject, complimented the house, said I looked tired and should rest. I resented how easily he redirected me, and even more, how easily I let him. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply informed me that my property taxes and insurance had not been paid and that the situation needed attention. I read it 3 times before the meaning settled in. My hands shook, not from panic at first, but from disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had said everything would be handled. When I called him, he answered on the second ring. I told him about the notice, my voice careful, controlled. He paused, then sighed, as if I'd inconvenienced him. "Those things take time," he said. "The bank sorts it out. You don't need to worry." That was the moment resentment hardened into something solid. Every word he spoke felt dismissive. Not cruel, worse than that, casual. As if my fear was an overreaction, as if the house was just another account number. I thought about all the times I'd worried for him, stayed silent so he wouldn't feel pressured. Now he was asking me to do the same. Another letter came. This one was clearer. It mentioned the possibility of foreclosure if the issues weren't resolved. The word felt unreal, like it didn't belong to my life. I called the lender myself. The woman on the phone was professional, measured. She explained that funds had been drawn from the loan and that responsibility for taxes and insurance still remained. When she said the funds had gone to my son, I felt something break inside me. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough that I knew it couldn't be put back together. I thanked her and hung up, then sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the wall. That evening, my son called me. He spoke first, his tone gentle, almost patient. "I heard you made some calls," he said. "You don't need to get involved in the details." Every word felt like a reminder that he believed he was in control. I resented how confident he sounded, how certain he was that I would back down. I told him I was scared. He told me I was misunderstanding things. I told him the letters mentioned foreclosure. He said those notices were routine and that I should trust him. Trust. The word stung more than anything else. Trust was what I had given freely. Now it felt like something he was using against me. After the call ended, the house felt different. The walls didn't offer comfort anymore. I realized that while the loan was supposed to give me security, it had done the opposite. It had shifted power away from me and placed it quietly into his hands. And sitting there alone, resentment settled deep in my chest, not just toward him, but toward myself, for believing that love alone was enough to protect me. By the time I sat across from the housing counselor, I was no longer confused. I was resentful in a way that felt heavy and alert at the same time, like my body finally understood it had been left unguarded. The room was quiet, neutral, and safe. Everything my conversations with my son had stopped being. The counselor spoke slowly, clearly, never rushing me. She explained what a reverse mortgage is supposed to be, a loan designed to help older homeowners stay in their homes, not lose them. She told me there are rules meant to protect people like me, including the requirement that borrowers receive independent counseling before signing anything. As she spoke, I felt anger rise. Not at the bank, not yet, but at my son for insisting I didn't need anyone else involved. I remembered how he had waved off my questions. "I'll handle it." Each time he said it, he had taken something from me. My right to understand, my right to choose fully informed. The counselor explained that I should have been told exactly how the money could be used, who had access to it, and what responsibilities remained mine. Taxes, insurance, ongoing obligations that do not disappear just because a loan exists. Hearing that made my jaw tighten. My son had spoken as if everything would be taken care of, as if the house would float along untouched while money simply appeared. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. She told me that no one else should benefit from the loan without my clear understanding and consent. Any arrangement that shifted the money elsewhere should have been explained in plain language. I thought of how confidently my son had talked about his business, how smoothly he'd said, "It benefits us both." That was when the emotional weight of it hit me all at once. This reminded me of the day years ago when he'd asked me to co-sign his first loan. I had hesitated then, too. He'd used the same tone, the same patient smile, the same assurance that I didn't need to worry. I had trusted him then, and I trusted him again now. Sitting there, I realized this wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern I had chosen to ignore because I wanted to be supportive. The counselor asked if I remembered signing a form confirming I'd received counseling before the loan closed. I shook my head. I remembered signing many things, but none of them explained to me by someone neutral. The resentment sharpened. My son hadn't just helped me sign paperwork, he had made sure no one else could interrupt his version of the truth. She went on to explain protections that exist to keep people from being displaced unfairly, including safeguards meant to stop exactly what I was experiencing. As she spoke, I felt something shift inside me. I could have gotten angry earlier. I could have confronted him loudly, accused him outright. But I hadn't. I had chosen silence, at first out of love, and then out of fear of breaking what little peace remained between us. That choice now felt expensive. The counselor looked at me and said, "What you're describing sounds like misrepresentation." The word landed hard. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. I thought of my son's calm voice, the way he never raised it, the way he made everything sound reasonable. I resented that most of all, that he never needed force or pressure. He relied on my trust. As I left the office, I replayed his words in my head. Don't stress. Trust me. It's all connected. Each phrase now felt carefully chosen, designed to keep me from asking the very questions that could have protected me. Driving home, I passed the house I grew up in, still standing after all these years. I wondered how many parents had sat at kitchen tables like mine, believing they were doing the right thing. The unfairness of it pressed down on me. I had paid for this home with decades of work. I had kept it safe through every hardship, and yet I had been the last person to truly understand what was happening to it. That night, I didn't call my son. I sat with the knowledge instead. For the first time, my resentment wasn't just pain, it was clarity. And with that clarity came a quiet, steady resolve. I didn't tell my son what I was about to do. For once, I kept something to myself. That decision alone made my heart pound, not with fear, but with a strange sense of balance returning. I scheduled another meeting with the housing counselor, and this time I brought every document I could find. I laid them out on the table carefully, the same way I used to organize his school papers when he was a child. The irony wasn't lost on me. The counselor reviewed the paperwork line by line. She didn't rush. She didn't interrupt. Each pause felt respectful, and each explanation made my resentment grow sharper, not toward her, but toward my son, who had denied me this clarity from the start. She pointed out where disclosures should have been clear and where responsibilities had been glossed over. Hearing it spoken plainly made my stomach tighten. None of this was accidental. She suggested filing a formal complaint for misrepresentation. The word still felt heavy, but it also felt honest. I signed the form myself this time, slowly reading every sentence. When I walked out of that office, I felt smaller in years and stronger in spine. A few days later, my son called. His voice was calm, but there was a new edge beneath it. "The bank reached out," he said. "They're asking questions. Did you do something?" The way he said something made my resentment flare, as if protecting myself were a betrayal. I told him I had spoken to a counselor. There was a pause, longer than usual. He reminded me gently but firmly that he had only been trying to help. That phrase, trying to help, hit me harder than any accusation. It was the same shield he always used, the same one that made me doubt my own feelings. He said the situation was being handled. I said I needed transparency. He laughed softly and told me I was overreacting. Every word felt like a dismissal of my fear, my home, my right to understand what was happening. I realized then how much he relied on my reluctance to push back. Not long after, I received notice that the foreclosure process had been suspended while the complaint was under review. The relief was real, but so was the anger. It shouldn't have taken this much effort just to be heard. When I told my son, his tone changed. The confidence faded. He asked what I had told them. I answered honestly. The truth didn't need dressing up. He accused me of not trusting him. I wanted to shout that trust was what had put me here. Instead, I stayed calm. I told him I needed to protect myself. That silence on the other end of the line felt heavier than any argument. As the review continued, the lender asked for clarification on who controlled the funds and whether I had understood the terms. Each question felt like a quiet acknowledgement that something was wrong. My resentment wasn't loud anymore. It was focused. Every polite email, every measured phone call reminded me how differently this could have gone if my son had respected my right to know. When the bank confirmed that the foreclosure would remain on hold, I sat alone in my living room and let myself breathe. The house was still mine. For now, I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. My son hadn't shouted or threatened. He hadn't needed to. His calm assurances had been enough to almost cost me everything. Now, when he speaks, I listen differently. I hear the pauses. I hear what he avoids saying. And with each conversation, my resentment steadies me instead of weakening me. I had stepped out of the role he expected me to play, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on my own ground again. The meeting didn't happen at my kitchen table this time. It happened in a quiet office with neutral walls and a long table that felt too wide for family. My son arrived confident, just like always, but there was a tightness in his jaw I had never seen before. He smiled when he saw me, the same polite smile he used when he wanted to calm things down. Instead, it stirred my resentment all over again. The terms were laid out clearly. He could repay what had been taken from the loan and make things right, or the situation would move forward in a way neither of us wanted. Every sentence was calm, professional, measured. No raised voices, no drama, and yet I felt the weight of every word pressing on my chest. My son leaned back in his chair and said, "This all seems extreme." That one sentence brought back everything, how he'd said I was overreacting, how he'd told me not to worry, how calm he always sounded when I was the one losing sleep. I felt resentment rise again, not hot, not explosive, but steady and clear. He still didn't believe he had done anything wrong. He said he never meant for things to go this far. I noticed he didn't say he was sorry. That detail stayed with me. It told me more than any apology could have. I kept my voice even as I explained what the house meant to me, not as a building, but as proof of a life lived carefully. He nodded like he understood, but his eyes kept drifting to the papers, to the numbers. When he finally agreed to repay the amount and step back, his tone softened. "I just want things to go back to normal," he said. Normal. The word made my resentment settle into something final. There was no going back, not after trust had been treated like a tool instead of a bond. After the agreement was signed, I took another step I had been thinking about for weeks. I transferred the house into a trust, one that protected it from being controlled by anyone else. When I told him his name would no longer be connected to it, he looked genuinely surprised. "You don't trust me anymore?" he asked quietly. I paused before answering. I thought about yelling once. I thought about staying silent the way I used to. Instead, I chose honesty. I told him trust isn't something that disappears all at once. It fades when it's tested too many times. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully accept it. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. In the weeks that followed, things grew quiet between us. He called less. When he did, his words were careful, measured, almost rehearsed. Each conversation reminded me of how easily warmth can be replaced by distance. I resented that he had forced me into this role. The one who had to draw boundaries, the one who had to protect herself from her own child. And yet, there was relief, too. The house felt like mine again. The walls didn't feel fragile anymore. I walked through each room with a steadier step, aware that safety isn't just about locks or paperwork. It's about knowing who holds power over your life. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I could have handled things differently, if I had asked harder questions sooner, if love had made me blind or simply hopeful. I still love my son. That never changed. But love no longer means silence. The final papers were filed on a quiet afternoon. No ceremony, no celebration, just closure. As I left the office, I realized something important. Resentment hadn't turned me bitter. It had turned me alert. It had taught me to listen not just to words, but to what sits behind them. When I returned home, I stood in the doorway a little longer than usual. I placed my hand on the frame, the same way I had after my husband passed, the same way I had when my son first moved out. The house had seen every version of me. Now it was seeing one more, wiser, firmer, and no longer afraid to speak. If this story feels close to home, that's not an accident. Some lessons don't arrive loudly. They arrive wrapped in familiar voices, polite smiles, and promises that sound safe. And once you see that clearly, you never listen the same way again.